Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about how to design in the browser as fast as possible. In the previous video I talked about how to get a workflow going so that you don't have to go back into your text editor. You can just type code directly in the DevTools. But in this video I'm going to talk about what I do just to speed that up a little bit so that it's an enjoyable experience. So the first tip I have is if you want to design in the browser, I'd really recommend popping the DevTools out. So by default, if you hit Command, Option, and I, that will open up DevTools, and they'll be docked to the side like this. The problem I have with this is sometimes you want to get everything out of the way and just see the website, and anything distracting you doesn't help in analyzing what's going on with the websites and whether it looks as good as it can. So I always prefer to undock them, and you can do this just by going to the top right, clicking this separate window icon. And once you've done this, you can use, if you're on Mac, you can use like Command tilde to switch back and forth. It makes it a lot easier so you're concentrating on one thing or the other. You can also use like a window management software, which is kind of what I do, to throw the window around. Sometimes I'll throw this window like an iPad size and then have this to the side. Other times I just want to like maximize this and have this toggled back and forth. The second thing is to use the ruler tool. So for example, if I highlight over here, you can see these soft gray lines. I mean, my website is probably not the best example to use, but you can see the soft gray lines overlaid on top of the black lines. And so if you grab something, so let's say I grab this paragraph, and you can see these rulers, and then without moving the mouse left or right, I just scroll up. You can see these lines extend all the way upwards, so I can easily see if it's aligned correctly. So for example, I can see that the beginning of the title in this case is aligned with that, which I like. So to do this, this is not turned on by default. What you need to do is go to the Elements tab here, hit Shift and then question mark, and it's here, Show Rulers. And these will show whenever you're highlighting an element like this. I find that useful as a designer to make sure that everything is lined up. The next tip I have for you is to make getting into like HTML prototyping as quick as possible is to have like a base CSS file that will be a good starting point for any project. As an example, I have like a project which I call CSS Framework, and in here I have two files. I have core.css, and I know these variables, even though I might delete some of them, will pretty much be in every single project. So spacing variables, color variables, grayscale colors, a few gradient examples, and font stuff like families and sizes here. And I've also got a bunch of box shadow examples. These are kind of shadows that I really like. A reset, loads of element stuff, like default element stuff, heading stuff, SVG, some focus things, some button things, and some utility classes. So I've tried to make this as minimal as possible, but this is pretty much, I know I'm going to need this for every project. And then I have a non-core CSS file, which is kind of the same, but some extra stuff that I don't always use. A good example is, I don't know, maybe some citation stuff, block quote stuff. I don't always use that in every single project. Some iframe things, and some examples of text underlines. You get the point. So what I'll typically do is dump the core file into whatever I'm starting off with, and maybe drag some non-core code over as I go. So aside from those general tips, the rest of the tips here will be pretty much all about efficiency in terms of typing and trying to get rid of any awkwardness between you and typing properties and values and moving around different files. When I think about this, the best way to think about it is if you're used to using, let's say, Photoshop, and Photoshop has lots of different tools like the stamp tool, the clone tool, the paintbrush tool, blah, 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 blah. And if you've spent any time in Photoshop, you start to learn the keyboard shortcuts to get to those tools. So for example, if I want a brush tool, I press B. If I want the pen tool, I press P. And these shortcuts are quite easy to remember because they all start with the same letter as the tool you want. So P for pen, B for brush. And once you get used to that workflow, you can move around and sort of get into the flow of things or grok things, as they say, without feeling too much of the computer between you and what you're doing. And this is how I feel about making sure that I can write CSS quickly. I want to do it as fast as I can without really thinking about it. So I'm going to tell you some of the keyboard shortcuts that I think are really, really good for this. So the first thing is around incrementing, so budging things up and down. A good example might be font size. So for example, I can see the line height here is 1.5. And let's say I want to play around with this. You can go in and type 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, but it's kind of a little bit awkward. The easier way to do it is use a modifier key and use the arrow keys. With DevTools, to go up a point, it's the Option key or Alt key, and you can see that goes up. So now I'm just holding Alt and hitting up or down to budge the value up or down. I can see much more clearly now the difference between the various different points and what the sweet spot might be. You can also do this when you author CSS. If I go into the actual core file, I'm just going to refresh this. It's not connecting to my file. Okay, now you can see the green light means it's connected. So if I go into this, now unfortunately in the sources panel, which is where we are here, you can't budge up by a point. I think this is an oversight by the developers of DevTools. So here, Command and Option will budge this up by a whole number, which is not great when dealing with small increments like line height or ems, but it's still there. And if we try something like font size, again, you have a few more options in the styles pane, which is in the elements panel. So here I can hold shift and the arrow to bump it up by 10 points each time. So this is useful for, again, finding the sweet spot for what you want to do. Another keyboard shortcut I really like to jump around the different files is it's called previous and next edit points. So if I go to shortcuts here, you can see it. Jump to next editing location or jump to previous editing location. So if you have a fairly longish CSS file, this is really useful. It means, let's say, I don't know, I'm editing one of the elements here, like image, I just put a border around that, and then I go somewhere else in the file, type something, and then, oh, I need to get back to image. I can press Alt, then minus to get back to where I was previously, and Alt and plus to get forward to where I was previously. Really, really handy. The next tip I have for you is around diving back and forth between inspecting things. So if you see at the top, there's these different panels that we can access, and it's possible to, one, rearrange these. So I don't know, let's say we want Lighthouse at the end. I can just drag it to the end. And number two, you can actually access these with a keyboard shortcut, but it's not turned on by default. So if we press Shift and question mark on the elements panel to get back to these preferences, what you need to do is check enable 1 to 9 shortcut to switch panels. And what this means is when we're in the elements panel, we can hit Command 3 to get to the sources panel and then Command 1 to get back. This is quite handy. To be honest, I pretty much only use the elements and sources panel. The rest are rare, but it's worth enabling that keyboard shortcut just to get this kind of flow going on. So these are the core things that I recommend you turn on. The next thing I'm going to talk about is probably a personal thing for me, and that's I really like automation software. So the one that you might have heard of is it's called Text Expander, and this was popular a few years ago, and it's typically about expanding text with email or messages or something, where you might want to say, like support response, and then it would ask you for some variables and then write the message out for you. So there's Text Expander and loads of other automation software, but the one that I really like is called Keyboard Maestro. And Keyboard Maestro is like Text Expander, but on steroids. And it will automate and create pretty much any workflow you can think about. The other great thing about it is it's all visually composed, so it's very easy to put things together. So I use this to the max when it comes to editing things in DevTools. And I'll just show you now what I mean. So a good example might be, so I might want to add some padding at the top of this entry content, or let's say I want to quickly see where it is. So with my Keyboard Maestro shortcuts, I can very quickly add a border onto this. So I have a keyboard shortcut to quickly highlight elements with the classic 3-pixel solid red. I can see straight away what will be affected now. Okay, I also have a keyboard shortcut to delete a line, so I just press that here. And let's say I want to add padding top. The way I've created these is I think about how to abbreviate that. So it would be padding top, PT, and then I just add an extra letter on the end. And that just makes sure that I don't accidentally type it. So it would be PTT. And straight away that types out the full value, and it also puts us in the position where we can start to see the presets. So this is really handy. I'll just do it again quickly, PTT, and then I can start hitting up and down on these to select a value. And with that, you can see I can very quickly start playing with values. And I have these shortcuts set up for pretty much every value that I use. So for example, margin auto would be MAA, margin left, MLL. So with this, what I'm going to do is include all the macros that I use as an attachment to this blog post. And I'm going to walk you through some of these now so you can get an understanding of how we can save some time. So I'll zip all these up in a folder, but I'm just going to walk you through them now. I should add that Keyboard Maestro is definitely not sponsoring this post, and you can get a free trial. I think it's quite a generous free trial for maybe a couple of months. Okay, so the first thing I'll say is that I have loads of different macros for each property within the sources pane. So for example, like display flex would be dis, then F. Display grid would be dis, then G. And since I made these up myself, I can quite easily remember exactly what the shortcut is. I also have them for the elements panel, since the way that this works is slightly different. So it puts the colon in between these, and just slightly different to the way that the sources work. So for them, I type full stop first, and then it would be the same. So I type full stop, PTT, and that would get me straight away into playing about with different spacing variables. The good thing about using the elements panel is it gives you a live preview straight away. So I can literally go through all these spacing values and see exactly how they look real time in the browser. If I want to discard that, I can just reload the page, because what we've done here is put an element style in, so that's not saved. But if I wanted to add this to my actual style sheet, I would start within here. So this is a rule in the style sheet, and I could type PTT and let's say L2. And then if I reload the page, that will have stayed because we've mapped it to our disk. So I've got different macros for each of the properties on both elements and sources, the different panels, elements and sources. And then I also have some extra ones. For example, I really don't like the way that DevTools automatically comment stuff out. So for example, if I comment this out using the default method, you'll see that it's added this right at the beginning, and it's sort of ugly. So I've made my own, which quickly adds one to the start properly, so it's nice and neat. So I've got that one. I've also got the delete a line shortcut, which you've seen me use before, which is basically emulating what's already in like VS Code. This is a really useful one, move things to the next or previous line. So this is built into most IDEs by default, but it's not in DevTools, so I've just sort of made my own version. So here, let's say I wanted to move the padding block start value, or property rather, up above. I can press this keyboard shortcut and it will move it for me using a macro. And I have some other like miscellaneous ones. For example, let's change the filter on this image. If I go to image, and you can see I've got a filter on this already. Now I can never remember what the filter values are. So here if I type filter and then add an extra R on the end, Keyboard Maestro, or I've got Keyboard Maestro to like dump all the different possible values here, and you know, some of my favorites with pre-filled in values. And so what I would do here is just experiment with these, and then when I'm done, delete all the others. So it's really useful for whatever you can imagine automating and making things faster for yourself in DevTools. And with all this, with the DevTools connected to my disk via the workspaces feature and automating lots of the properties and values, I find it really, really fast to design in the browser. I realize each to their own, but I think it's worth considering what the options are and maybe things that you haven't thought about that might persuade you to experiment a bit more directly in the browser. Thanks for listening to my absolute rambles. Hope you've learned something. Pretty sure most people don't work like this, so maybe it's challenged your workflow.